Chapter 1021. The little Qin garden was prepared by her for Tang Xin. There was an abstract sculpture on it, which was based on Tang Xin, but Shunlian had never seen it. It was a theme park with Tang Xin as the center, which was the only thing Pei Qi could do for Tang Xin. She bought a villa for Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shun there for retirement, and the location was the best. She set up Shunlian in every way, but she never attacked Shunlian personally. Elegant Building and Newman Group took great advantage. But didn't it also save Shunlian? Chi could have waited a little longer, waiting for Shunlian to fall into a worse situation, but she still gave Shunlian a way out. Tang Yu's heart was soft and proud at the same time. He was not the one who taught Chi these things, but she had learned them all by herself. He thought that she always complained that she didn't want to do business, and always said that she wanted to return Boyi to him. He could take over Boyi, but Jin Taihe was chosen by Shin Zhongshan to be his successor. Newman Group got 20% of Jin Taihe's shares, and soon Shunlian would be removed from the position of the first shareholder. This was just around the corner. He turned his head and kissed the little fellow in his arms. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi, Tang Yu, I know you love me, she whispered in his arms. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, and then he chuckled. Yes, he loved her. Deep love. At the summit in B-City, Shunlian and Pei Qi met again. Shunlian's face was full of pride. She looked at Pei Qi and sneered. Pei Qi, you didn't expect it, did you? Elegant Building can sell so well. Yes, I didn't expect it, Pei Qi said lightly. Then congratulations, Miss Shen. Xiaowan, who was beside Pei Qi, couldn't help but say. It seems that half of the ownership of the Elegant Villa is already in the hands of French Newman Company, right? Shunlian's expression didn't change. She smiled gently. Even so, Elegant Villa is still a success. This development project is also profitable. As long as President Shun is happy. Pei Qi smiled. Shunlian snorted, and the two of them walked past each other. The new assistant by Shunlian's side was the same as Shunlian. She was good at flattery. She snorted as she walked. President Shun, they are just bluffing. Who doesn't say that Mr. Shun has good foresight in investing in the G55 plot? Shunlian sneered. Let her be proud for a few days. I want the sales of Elegant Building to give her a hard slap in the face. Exactly. Boyi's flowing water mansion is selling for 200,000 yuan per square meter. Only a ghost would buy it. The little assistant wanted to make Shunlian feel better, so she flattered her. Shunlian glanced at her and said softly, there's no need to worry about sales in Shuixihua Manor. That location just happens to be the school district of a certain famous school. Although the sales aren't that great right now, you just wait and see. They'll definitely be sold out within 2 years. Shunlian was quite jealous because this small district would go crazy from the competition. Pei Qi was no longer someone she could look down on, however. Shunlian didn't expect that there would be something that she couldn't look down on later. She was deeply shocked. After Elegant Building sold well for half a month, Newman Company held a celebration party at GM. This was suggested by Shunlian. She deliberately wanted Pei Qi to know. Chapter 1022. Shunlian held a glass of wine and looked at the handsome and elegant Jack. She was a little drunk and leaned into Jack's arms. Her eyes were seductive. Jack, you're the most powerful man I've ever seen. There was a hint in her eyes. Jack's blue eyes flashed with a touch of inscrutability. Lotus, do you mean business or in bed? Let's go to the hotel room later to discuss. Shunlian tugged at his tie and murmured. Jack's soul had been hooked. But this foreigner had a special characteristic. Business was business, private was private. Women were just his entertainment. At this moment, he suddenly stood up and coughed. My boss is here. Newman CEO? Shunlian straightened up and looked over. She wanted to make friends with him. Jack was just a springboard for her. Such a man was just a lover. It was too far to talk about anything else. Shunlian used the most perfect posture to welcome the legendary CEO Newman. But the moment she looked up, she was stunned. Jack's boss, the CEO of Newman, was actually Pei Qi. Jack solemnly held Pei Qi's hand and bent his knees to kiss the back of her hand. Pei, you're beautiful tonight. Thank you. Pei Qi looked at Shunlian and smiled. Miss Shan is here too. Shun Lian was shocked. She still couldn't believe that Pei Chi was the CEO of Newman. Impossible. She was shocked. She stared at Pei Chi's beautiful and hateful face. After a long time, she squeezed out a word. So it's you. She looked at Pei Chi suspiciously. So, you asked to change the name of Yuju? That's right. Pei Chi held a glass of red wine and raised it high. She looked at Shun Lian's twisted face through the golden wine. He smiled faintly and said, President Shun, I advise you to tidy up your expression. Otherwise, when you appear in the newspapers, it will be too ugly. Shun Lian glared at her and gritted her teeth. Pei Chi, you're so cunning. She had worked so hard to bid for the G55 plot, and Pei Chi had raised the price by so much. In the end, her Newman had interfered and snatched half of the meat out of her mouth. How could Shun Lian not hate him? You think too much. Pei Chi smiled indifferently. Shun Lian, the business world is like this. It's ever-changing. Shun Lian gritted her teeth. Pei Chi, you've always had a sharp tongue. Pei Chi looked at her and said, If President Shun thinks so, there's nothing I can do. Shun Lian was about to say something, but she suddenly thought of something and her face turned pale. Pei Chi was Newman's CEO, and she had sold 20% of Jean Taiha to Newman. Then, so the 20% was now in Pei Chi's hands? Shun Lian's heart was trembling. She felt that the tide was turning. A G55 plot had easily cheated her of her shares. All of this was Pei Chi's conspiracy. You knew that there was a problem with the G55 plot, didn't you? Shun Lian's lips trembled and turned pale. Even if her face was covered with a layer of powder, she still looked very ugly at this moment. Pei Chi did not deny it. Yes. Shun Lian took a step back and her eyes fell on Jack. Jack shrugged his shoulders, looking indifferent. He was just an executioner. As for the fact that he had slept with Shun Lian, beautiful women always made people unable to control themselves. Chapter 10:23. Even if elegant building could make money, Shun Lian knew that she would lose more. She was facing the loss of the entire Jean Taiha. Pei Chi could get 20% of the shares from her, not to mention the other shareholders. This insidious bitch was as despicable as her mother. Shun Lian was helpless. The next day, she was also in a daze at the meeting. She was always worried that one day, Pei Chi would suddenly appear in front of her and take her place. At that time, she would really have nothing except money. But what did she need money for? What she didn't want to see the most was Pei Chi, that bitch, being complacent and taking away Tang Yu, her parents, and even the company. There was a touch of hatred in Shun Lian's eyes. At this time, Meng Qingcheng reminded her again, Miss Shun? Shun Lian came back to her senses and looked at Meng Qingcheng. What? Meng Qingcheng's eyes fell on her face, and he said slowly, Director Wang is asking Miss Shun about the change of 20% of the shares. Shun Lian was shocked, and then she looked up and saw Director Wang's aggressive face. This old guy had always opposed her, and now it was the right time to force her. Shun Lian squinted and looked at Director Wang, and her voice was a little cold. Does this have anything to do with Director Wang? She tried to be calm, but these old foxes would not be frightened by her. He snorted. How can it not have anything to do with Director Shun? Previously, Director Shun had 48% of the shares, so he had nothing to say when she sat in the position of the highest management. But now it's different. Now, I am still the owner of the highest shares. Shun Lian's face was as cold as frost. Director Wang, you don't want to work anymore, do you? Looking at the arrogant look of this little girl, Director Wang sneered in his heart. In the past, Shun Zhongshan would give them some face, but when it comes to Shun Lian, she simply doesn't take others seriously and acts alone. He stood up and said in a loud and clear voice, We'll have to wait for someone to come before we decide. Shun Lian's heart sank. She already had an idea. Her face was cold. Director Wang, no one has time to waste with you here. Meeting adjourned. She had to stop Pei Chi. She could not let Jean Taiha be taken by Pei Chi. However, since Director Wang had said so, how could he give up so easily? He smiled cunningly and said, What is President Shun afraid of? Are you afraid that we'll find out what you've done? Shun Lian was furious. Chairman Wang, watch your words. I'm still the CEO of Jean Taiha. On the other hand, Chairman Wang was much calmer. We'll know soon enough. Chairman Wang's words still carried some weight because he had followed Xinzhongshan to build his empire in the past, and he had 10% of the shares in his hands. It wasn't much, but it wasn't a small amount either. As he spoke, he personally walked to the door and pulled it open with both hands. Pei Chi stood outside the door with her old team members beside her. The room was in an uproar. Pei Chi walked in slowly, and Director Wang welcomed her and sat down in his seat. After sitting down, Pei Chi looked to the side and said, "Lawyer Chun, show them the documents." Lawyer Chen nodded and passed the documents to everyone, including Shan Lian. After receiving the documents, Shan Lian was stunned. Then, she said sternly, "This is impossible. How could it be?" Pei Chi actually had 30% of the shares. Chapter 10:24. That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. Her voice was shrill. Pei Chi, you're lying. I'm going to call the police, arrest you, and lock you up for life. Pei Chi looked at her agitated face and smiled faintly. At that moment, Director Wang opened his mouth. What he said was earth-shattering. I transferred 10% of my shares to Boss Pei. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was shocked again. Director Wang smiled desolately. I've followed old Shun my whole life and watched him live a glorious life. I didn't expect to die in the hands of the apple of my eye when I'm old. Everyone, I'm not selling my master for glory. Boss Pei is also Chongshan's daughter. She's more suitable to manage Jin Taihe than Shan Lian. The other shareholders nodded. Indeed, Jin Taihe had been going downhill for the past 2 years, and Shan Lian's decisions were becoming more and more doubtful. Yes, I think so too. Yes, Boss Pei looks quite reliable. She's managing Boyi well. All these words agitated Shan Lian so much that she couldn't sit still. She shouted crazily, "Shut up! Shut up!" This was not true. She didn't believe it at all. Shan Lian's beautiful face was distorted and kept shaking. Then, she said sternly, "Where's the security? Security? Hurry up and drag this woman out. She's crazy. She's a lunatic." Shan Lian looked hysterical as if she had gone mad. Everyone sighed. Shan Lian was probably going to be destroyed. Pei Chi's expression was indifferent. As the biggest shareholder of Jin Taihe, I request for a new management. There was a lot of discussion. That's right. Yes, Boss Pei is the biggest shareholder. We can rest assured if she's the president. Everyone was talking at once, pushing Shan Lian to the heart of the struggle. Her body trembled, and her lips trembled for a long time. She couldn't say a word. The situation was hopeless. She still lost to Pei Chi. Jin Taihe's CEO was replaced by Pei Chi, and Shan Lian was just an empty title. It didn't matter whether she came to work or not. At the Shin family villa, Shan Lian was wearing a pure white evening gown. Classical music was playing in the bedroom. It was a song that Tang Yu liked. She hummed a tune and danced along with the music, dancing, spinning, spinning. Even if her feet hurt like hell, even if her forehead was covered in cold sweat, she did not stop. From dawn to dusk, she seemed to be dancing tirelessly. That appearance was very beautiful. Today is the day that Pei Chi works in Jin Taihe. Soon, she will remarry Tang Yu. She, Shan Lian, had finally suffered a crushing defeat. She had finally lost everything, and there was no way for her to make a comeback. She chuckled and took more than 10 pills from the dresser. She chuckled, "Dad, I once used this medicine to harm you. You must hate me in your heart. I'll give it back to you now." Shan Lian put the medicine in her mouth and picked up a glass of red wine. She swirled it gently and murmured, "What will happen if I drink this wine and this medicine?" It didn't matter anymore. Anything was better than living a half-dead, half-alive life like this. Her red lips were pressed against the cold rim of the glass, and she drank half of it in small sips. The wine mixed with the medicine entered her stomach. After calming down, it was followed by pain. At noon, the servants went upstairs to call Shan Lian for lunch. They knocked on the door for a long time, but it didn't open. When she opened the door, she was stunned. Chapter 10:25. She had a bad temper, so the servants didn't dare to approach her. But when they saw the wine glasses on the carpet and a few pills on the floor, they were shocked. They immediately called an ambulance and sent Shanlian to the hospital to have her stomach pumped. The doctor said that she had taken a lot of drugs. After testing the rest of the drugs in the house, he couldn't help but shake his head. She had taken more than 10 drugs that damaged her brain. Even if she didn't die, it was hard to say what would happen to her. At first, she was fine. But gradually, it was said that Shunlian's mental state wasn't normal. Mrs. Shun had been taking care of her for a few days. Her tears had washed her face, but no matter how many tears she shed, she couldn't bring back an outstanding daughter. Shin Zhongshan said heavily, "Sushin, do you blame me?" Blame him for forcing her daughter into such a situation. Mrs. Shin lay there for a long time and didn't speak. She was very sad, but her heart was clear. The one who had caused Shunlian to become like this was herself. If she hadn't done so many wrong things, why would she have to go down such a path? Zhongshan, she doesn't need money. Why did she take it so hard? Mrs. Shun closed her eyes. She didn't let anyone off, not even herself. Her tears fell. She had shed so many tears in the past 2 years that her eyes were almost blind. Shin Zhongshan's heart was also heavy. He looked at Shunlian's sleeping face and said softly, "Sushin, maybe this is the best ending for her." Mrs. Shun was stunned. Then, she laughed softly and said in a daze, "Yes, she won't torture herself anymore. She won't harm others anymore. This is the best ending." And the worst thing was that Shunlian was pregnant. She didn't know who the child in her stomach belonged to because her private life was too messy, but no matter whose child it was, this child couldn't be kept. Because Shunlian had taken a lot of drugs that damaged her brain, there must be something wrong with this child. Mrs. Shun only felt that it was a sin. The child was miscarried. When it was miscarried, Mrs. Shan heard the sound of Shunlian crying because of the pain. She closed her eyes and kept chanting Buddhist scriptures, hoping to bring peace to Shunlian. After staying in the hospital for half a month, Shunlian was transferred to a private nursing home. Pei Chi went to see her. She got out of the car and asked Tang Yu to wait in the car. At first, he was a little worried. Pei Chi shook her head. "It's okay. There are doctors accompanying us." No matter what, she still wanted to see Shunlian. On one hand, it was for their blood relationship. On the other hand, she still didn't believe it from the bottom of her heart. From the bottom of her heart, Pei Chi had some doubts. Shunlian didn't look like a person who couldn't stand stimulation. How could she suddenly become mentally abnormal? Even if he had taken medicine, why did he choose to take this kind of medicine? It just happened to make him stupid. Shin Zhongshan could pretend, but what if Shunlian was also pretending? So, she had to see it for herself. When she opened the door, the beige ward was clean and tidy. It didn't look like a ward, but more like an apartment. Shunlian was sitting on the sofa, wearing pure white pajamas. Her long hair fell on her shoulders, but her face was haggard. She was holding a little red flower in her hand. As she plucked it, she murmured, "He loves me. He doesn't love me. He loves me. He doesn't love me." Chapter 10:26. Pei Chi stood at the door and watched. She had an indescribable feeling in her heart because she knew that the him that Shunlian was referring to was Tang Yu. Shunlian's doctor sighed beside her. "She's been like this for a long time. All the flowers in the hospital have been plucked for her." Pei Chi asked softly, "How is she doing? Is there any sign of improvement?" Dr. Lin thought for a moment. "Not good. She's fine during the day. She plays these boring games by herself. But at night, she often cries when she wakes up. When she wakes up, she refuses to go back to sleep. She just sits there for the whole night." He added, "She had a miscarriage before. She's always there at night asking for a child. The other patients don't dare to sleep because of the sound. Later on, she's the only one living on this floor." Pei Chi was sad. She looked at her quietly for a long time. Can't she be cured? She had a rough idea that the child might be Jack's. Jack was the last person that Shunlian loved. Dr. Lin thought for a moment and smiled faintly. "This is a mental illness. It's up to her whether she recovers or not. Of course, we'll use medicine to control her emotions." At this moment, Shunlian raised her eyes and stared at Pei Chi. There was curiosity in her eyes, but there was also a trace of innocence that did not belong to Xin Lian. She looked straight at Pei Chi and called out cautiously, Chi? Pei Chi felt that her mind was in a mess. She looked at Xin Lian and found a trace of Tang Xian in her face. Xin Lian pursed her lips and asked cautiously, Chi, don't you like me anymore? I'm Tang Xian. Pei Chi felt a pain in her heart. It was as if an invisible hand was squeezing it. It was so painful that she could not breathe. Pei Chi ran away. The person that she hated the most had turned into the person that she loved the most. That expression was so similar to Tang Xian. She did not dare to look because Xin Lian was not Tang Xian. But what kind of temptation was that? She would never forget that tone of voice. At this moment, it was like a needle poking at her heart. When they reached the ground floor, Pei Chi stood there, panting heavily. Tang Yu came over and looked at her. Chi, what's wrong? His hand was still on her shoulder. She looked up and her breathing was still rapid. Tang Yu. Her voice was slightly hoarse, and her pupils constricted with a trace of terror. She heard herself speak slowly. Tang Yu, Xin Lian thinks of herself as Tang Xian. His fingers tightened, and Pei Chi slowly came back to her senses, but she still couldn't calm down. She gasped for air, and there was something hopeless in her eyes. Tang Yu patted her back and pressed her into his arms. His voice was very soft. Don't be afraid. Tang Xian was the deepest wound in her heart, a pain that she did not dare to touch. But now, it was torn apart by Xin Lian. She buried herself in his arms and trembled helplessly. It was as if she had returned to that day 2 years ago. When she woke up, she heard that Tang Xian was gone. The weather was clear that day, and many pigeons were cooing in the sky. But to Pei Chi, that day was a nightmare. That day, she lost Tang Xian. She lost the Tang Xian who always called her Chi in a soft voice. Chi, she's not Tang Xian. Tang Yu pressed her head tightly and told her over and over again that she was not Tang Xian. Chapter 10:27. On the way back, she was in a daze, and when she returned to the rose garden, she had a fever. Her fever was over 39 degrees, and her clothes were soaked with sweat. Tang Yu kept changing her clothes and cooling her down, and the family doctor stayed by her side the whole night. Late at night, Pei Chi woke up again, sweating all over. When she opened her eyes, the bedroom was dark, and there was no one around her. She sat up in a daze and saw Tang Yu coming out of the bathroom with a wet towel in his hand. She looked at him, and her eyes were as pure as a newborn animal, soft and docile. He looked at her for a long time, then walked over and reached out to touch her little head. Are you feeling better? Pei Chi nodded in a daze, and then shook her head. Her voice was a little hoarse. Tang Yu, what time is it? He held her with one hand and raised his hand to look at his watch. It's 4 o'clock. Change your clothes, drink some water, and sleep for a while. Only then did Pei Chi realize that he was still wearing the clothes he wore during the day. He hadn't changed his clothes at this hour. Haven't you slept? Pei Chi hugged his neck, buried her face in his neck, and let him take off her pajamas. Just like that, she nestled in his arms. Tang Yu nodded and carefully dried her body with a towel. He wanted to help her put on her pajamas, but the little girl hugged him tightly and refused to wear them. Chi. Tang Yu's voice was hoarse, and her palm was a little hot. Pei Chi hugged him and said in a low voice, Tang Yu, I want you to hug me. He patted her helplessly. Chi, I'm hugging you, aren't I? She rubbed her little face against his neck desperately. After a while, she raised her little face. Her long hair was loose, and there was a little sweat on her face and shoulders. Her little face was still red because of the high fever, and she looked very attractive. Be good, I won't hurt you. Tang Yu's voice was trembling. However, the little fellow in his arms moved her little mouth to his and kissed his lips. She sat in his arms like that, tender and tender. It was a temptation that no man could resist. Tang Yu was in a dilemma. His body was in pain, and he desperately wanted her, but his rational mind told him that he couldn't. She kissed him carelessly and tugged at his belt. He clearly did that. Tang Yu felt like he was sitting in a ball of fire in his arms. Tang Yu. She bit his lips and begged softly. He felt that his heart was about to melt. How could he be rational? He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When she was sick, he did not dare to indulge himself and only came once. When it was over, he kissed the little person in his arms contentedly, and she had already fainted. He felt heartache, guilt, and satisfaction at the same time. Early in the morning, when Pei Chi woke up, the morning light shone through the window and warmed her body. She reached out and touched the side of her pillow. There was no one there, and Tang Yu should be up. Thinking of her courage last night and the sweaty scene, she fell on the side of the pillow with a cry. She closed her eyes and her eyelashes fluttered. Suddenly, her face was kissed by something. It was like a feather brushing against her face, and it was soft and gentle. Chapter 10:28. The sun shone on her little face, and the fine fluff was like a small brush brushing across Pei Chi-Chi's heart. At that moment, her uneasy heart was comforted, and the darkness brought by Shun Lian was washed away. Pei Chi-Chi smiled at Xiaoxin and said in a low voice, "Who brought Xiaoxin here?" Xiaoxin's chubby little hand supported her little head, and her voice was sweet and crisp. "I came in Kuj's car." "Tang Yu?" Pei Chi-Chi looked around, but didn't see Tang Yu. "Kuj is making breakfast." The little fatty came over and got into Pei Chi-Chi's arms greedily. Pei Chi-Chi deliberately didn't stop it. After a while, the little hand quietly unbuttoned her shirt, and then there was a familiar. She closed her eyes and stroked the little fatty. "Xiaoxin, you've grown up." Xiaoxin didn't care, and her little hand held the bottle, and she had a craving. When Tang Yu entered the room, he saw such a scene. Her pajamas were slightly open, and her fair shoulders were half naked. She looked a little seductive, and there was a little thing in her arms. It was many times more seductive than when she was fully exposed. To be honest, Tang Yu was a little regretful. He shouldn't have brought Xiaoxin over. Otherwise, the person eating in her arms right now would be him. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him and was a little embarrassed. She pulled Xiaoxin out of her arms and gathered her pajamas. "Why did you pick up the little one so early in the morning?" "I thought you wanted to see her." Tang Yu's tone had a hint of a smile, and he reached out to put her tray on the table. He walked over and hugged both of them, one big and one small. He lowered his head and kissed their foreheads, and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Baby, get up and eat." Pei Chi-Chi blushed, and she got out of his arms and went into the bathroom. Xiaoxin was left to be held high by Kuj. Tang Yu held Xiaoxin, and his expression was a little complicated. Xiaoxin still called him brother. What should he do? Although the little guy was young, he already had his own ideas. Mr. Tang was having a headache. Pei Chi-Chi came out and changed into a set of home clothes. She felt much more energetic. "I feel so useless." She thought of how she was scared by Shun Lian and stuck out her tongue. Tang Yu helped her sit down and ate her breakfast. "Our Chi-Chi is very capable." Pei Chi-Chi was drinking milk. When she heard what he said, she understood what he meant. She stared at him with her eyes wide open and then spat it out. Xiaoxin looked at her anxiously. Why was it that this older sister was even more disobedient than her when eating? Thus, he carefully picked up a small fork, as if he was playing with little Zhao Yin. "Spank your little butt." "Kuj, spank my butt." Pei Chi-Chi was dumbfounded as she stared at Xiaoxin. But in Xiaoxin's mind, she should spank her little, but if she did something wrong. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi-Chi and smiled. "Chi-Chi, come over here to brother." She stared at him. Xiaoxin was being mischievous, and he was being mischievous too. But she did not know that he was recalling the situation that night, and his heart was moved. In the end, she was still caught by him. He pressed her down with his big palm and looked at Xiaoxin. If Kuj spank her, should Xiaoxin hit her hard or gently? Xiaoxin was in a dilemma. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi and then looked at Tang Yu. Kuj, hit her hard and then hit her gently. Pei Chi-Chi lay on his thighs and cried out, "You can't do this." Chapter 10:29. His palm hit her hard, and she moaned. The sound was trembling, and it was indescribably pitiful and alluring. Then, he patted her lightly, and did not pick it up again after it landed on her butt. Instead, he rubbed it for her soothingly, until she trembled. Tang Yu. She called his name softly. Xiaoxin was still worried that he would lead the children astray by doing this. Xiaoxin's eyes widened as she watched Kuj and her sister playing a game. Why did her sister look so happy, yet unhappy at the same time? Why was her sister crying? Did it hurt a lot? Xiaoxin crawled over and onto Tang Yu's lap. Then, Xiaoxin raised her little butt. Kuj, hit me. Hit Xiaoxin. Don't hit me anymore. Xiaoxin said with all her might. Her adorable look made Tang Yu not know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and patted her little butt lightly. Done. Xiaoxin whimpered and waited for Kuj to continue, just like how he did with her sister. But Xiaoxin did not get it even after waiting for a long time. Xiaoxin was very puzzled. It did not hurt at all. Kuj was biased. Pei Chi jumped down and ran to the bathroom to wash her face. She looked at her red face in the mirror. Tang Yu was too despicable. He treated her like that in front of Xiaoxin. She was wearing a casual dress. He used one hand to hit her, and the other hand had already reached inside. When he was hitting Xiaoxin, he used one hand to torment her. Pei Chi had never thought that Tang Yu was such a shameless man, but he was just that shameless now. Shameless. Shameless to the extreme. Behind her, there was another figure. Then, he hugged her from behind. Tang Yu's voice was extremely hoarse. Chi. His large palm was placed on her lower abdomen. Pei Chi was afraid that he would do something reckless, so she quickly grabbed his hand. Her eyes met his in the mirror. Her gaze was seductive. Tang Yu, your heart is out there. Don't mess around. Tang Yu's face rested on her thin shoulder and his voice was low. Chi, do you want me to act recklessly when I'm not careful? She clearly didn't mean it that way. Pei Chi glared at him in the mirror. Tang Yu smiled and suddenly held her hand. He put his face against hers and looked at her in the mirror. Miss Pei, when will you be Mrs. Tang again? She straightened up and stared at him. His expression was serious. Pei Chi's breathing suddenly became chaotic, and her chest heaved up and down violently. Tang Yu, he smiled, and a ring appeared in his hand out of nowhere. He slowly slipped it onto her fair ring finger. Pei Chi looked down at the ring. It was not eye-catching, just a circle of platinum. I took it from Grandpa. It's just right. Tang Yu kissed her cheek. Chi, let's get married. Shall we? Her face was a little red, and she played with the ring. After a long time, she said, Tang Yu, we're already married. He turned her around and pressed down on her shoulders, saying in a low voice, Miss Pei, we're living together illegally. She glared at him. Tang Yu pinched her little face. How about the wedding be set in a month? She glared at him. I'll only get married if Xiaoxin calls me mommy. Mr. Tang felt a headache coming on. The child was still young. Could he change it all at once? If you can't, then don't get married. Pei Chi said willfully. Mr. Tang can also marry your Xiaoqi. Chapter 10:30. Just as he was about to say something, Xiaoxin jumped in and called out to Sister Kuj, saying that the doctor was here. I want to poke your little butt. Xiaoxin smiled wickedly, revealing a row of sharp teeth. Chi was heartbreaking. Tang Yu threw her a mocking look, then carried her to the living room. Chi, go and poke your little butt. She pinched him discreetly. Dr. Lin was already waiting. He carefully examined her again and made sure that she was fine. He straightened up and smiled. It was a high fever caused by fear, but it should be fine now. You have to be careful not to get agitated again. The doctor's heart was in a mess. He saw that there was an obvious hickey on Pei Chi's neck. He looked at Tang Yu meaningfully. He didn't even let a patient go. Tang Yu asked the maid to send the doctor out. He turned back to look at Pei Chi and smiled. Are you feeling better? She lay on the bed and complained. Tang Yu. Dr. Lin must have seen through it. Now that she had recovered, he wanted to tease her a little. He walked over to the bed and placed the little fellow on his lap. Chi, what can Dr. Lin tell? He asked with a smile. What can you tell me? Her face was resting on his thighs. Her face was buried in his thighs. It was warm. He knew it all along, but he pretended not to know. Pei Chi lowered her head and kissed him. She sounded a little angry. Tang Yu, you're a jerk. He chuckled and hugged her. There was an indescribable warmth in his voice. You wanted it? Chi-Chi, don't you remember? You hugged me and begged me. He lowered his head and whispered in her ear. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't bear to listen to him. Tang Yu realized that Chi-Chi loved hugs when she was weak. He reached out and touched her little face. All right, rest at home for a few days before going back to work. He had touched her nerve. Pei Chi-Chi thought of Jean Taiha. That was the place where Shun Lian had stayed. Her body tensed up, and he could feel it clearly. Even though his heart ached for her, he still said firmly, Chi-Chi, you can't let yourself live in guilt because of Tang Exine. She's your sister, and at the same time, you're the closest person to her. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and said softly, Tang Yu, I know. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little face. I know our Chi-Chi is the bravest. She lay on his lap and didn't move. Her voice was also very gentle. Tang Yu, I really want to stay like this forever. He smiled and touched her little head. Silly girl, you don't want to be careful? Of course I want to be careful, Pei Chi-Chi said. She thought of the little person and looked around. Only then did she realize that the little person was gone. Tang Yu leaned against her neck. He was brought downstairs to play. She struggled to get up but was pressed down by him again. She felt her neck being bitten by him again. Tang Yu, are you a vampire? She snorted and wanted to push him away. Tang Yu hugged her in his arms and didn't do anything. He just hugged her and said with a smile, Chi-Chi, capitalists suck blood. She raised her little face and bit his neck, then another bite. Tang Yu let her do whatever she wanted. His heart was full of happiness. His Chi-Chi had always been the best and most suitable one for him. Chapter 1031. Pei Huan called Pei Chi-Chi. Tang Yu picked up and said that Pei Chi-Chi had a fever. Originally, Pei Huan wanted to go see Pei Chi-Chi, but she was pregnant and was about to give birth. It was inconvenient, so she could only wait at home for news. As she waited, she forgot that she was going to be admitted to the hospital. At night, it started to rain. The sound of the rain hitting the window was like falling bamboo beans. Pei Huan stood by the window and looked at it, wearing a nightgown. Still awake? Little Mei came in with a cup of milk, closed the door, and walked over to pass the milk to Pei Huan. Pei Huan took the milk. The temperature was just right. It was just like the care that Little Mei usually gave her. Pei Huan's voice was a little low. Little Mei, thank you. Little Mei smiled. What are you thanking me for? Pei Huan looked at her and said emotionally, a lot. Anyway, thank you, Little Mei. Drink the milk. Drink it and sleep. Little Mei urged her, but her voice was very gentle. Pei Huan was touched and her eyes were a little hot. After a while, she said softly, Little Mei, don't you feel pity? Pity what? Little Mei smiled and stood with her, looking at the boundless night. Ever since Kunmingju was no longer standing guard in front, Pei Huan had developed a habit of standing here. Pei Huan pursed her lips. A manager would think of a way to leave an artist like me. Little Mei, why didn't you? Little Mei smiled. Actually, I don't have that much ambition. I just follow the heavenly king and queen, and I'm still a manager. It's just that I'm a little more impressive in front of others. Maybe it's not as comfortable as it is now, but at least I can sleep until dawn. This was all thanks to the pregnant woman. Pei Huan looked at Little Mei. Not good. You've been infected by me. Maybe this is my nature. It was rare for Little Mei to joke with her. Actually, what she said was true. Living a quiet life like this was not lonely at all. Instead, it was relaxing. Pei Huan drank the milk and handed the cup to Little Mei. She said, if I'm not in king anymore, Little Mei, come and be my financial advisor. Little Mei smiled. I can guarantee that I will become your and the child's nanny. She raised her head. Heavens, I still want to fall in love and get married. I don't want to be a nanny so soon. I'll give you a holiday. You'll work 4 days a week. Pei Huan sincerely wanted her to stay. Little Mei looked at her and sighed. Pei Huan, you should find your own happiness. She could tell that Pei Huan was still thinking about Kunmingju in his heart, but he refused to admit it. The feeling of wanting to get close to old Kan but refusing to forgive him was not a good feeling, because Pei Huan could not find a reason to forgive old Kansas. Pei Huan pursed her lips, looking disinterested. Let's talk about it later. Xiaomei smiled and did not force her. She supported Pei Huan, who was pregnant, to the side of the bed and lay down. As she covered Pei Huan with a blanket, she seemed to have thought of something. I'll arrange for you to be admitted to the hospital tomorrow. With such a big belly, it looks like it will rain for a week. If you suddenly have to give birth, as Lil Mei spoke, she suddenly paused and looked at Pei Huan. Pei Huan bit her lips and frowned. It looks like she's about to give birth. She looked at Xiaomei. Little Mei was also a young lady. She had never seen it before. You look at me, I look at you. In the end, Little Mei was the one who bravely lifted the blanket to take a look. Chapter 1032. Pei Huan was about to cry. It was the middle of the night, and it was raining. Little Mei was even more speechless. She was such a jinx. I'll call Miss Pei. Little Mei picked up her phone, but Pei Huan stopped her. She gritted her teeth and said, No, she's sick. Little Mei still listened to her, but if Pei Chi didn't come, she could only call 120. She didn't know if such a heavy rain would come. At this moment, Pei Huan couldn't help but cry out because of the pain. Her cry was quite shrill. Little Mei panicked and quickly called 120. When the other party heard that it was childbirth, they immediately said that it wasn't their responsibility. Little Mei was so angry that she wanted to curse. At this moment, there was a loud sound downstairs, like the sound of a door lock being twisted open. Little Mei was shocked. Then, there was the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door was pushed open, and Oldkin stood at the door. Little Mei was stunned and murmured, I thought it was a thief. However, Oldkin had appeared like a deity. Pei Huan began to feel pain, and the excessive pain made her a little dazed. She seemed to see Oldkin in front of her. She couldn't believe it, but Oldkin really did appear. She cried out in pain. Oldkin looked at her, still in a daze. Are you going to give birth? Seeing him like this, Little Mei kicked him from behind. What time is it? Hurry up and send her to the hospital. Oldkin wiped the water off his face and immediately went forward to carry Pei Huan, but he stopped himself. After thinking about it, he took off his clothes and wiped them with a towel. In the cold spring weather, he wrapped Pei Huan tightly, but he walked outside bare-chested, and Little Mei followed him with an umbrella. Pei Huan was a little weak after the period. She looked up at Oldkin's face in a daze. Although his face had grown a big beard again, she could see that he had lost a lot of weight. Even his eye sockets were a little sunken. Pei Huan's fingers gently touched his face. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were lingering. Save your strength. You still have to work hard to give birth to our baby later. Oldkin gently placed her in the car and asked Little Mei to support her. Pei Huan was in pain again. Her forehead was drenched in sweat. She swallowed her saliva in pain and let out a long cry. Can Ming Zhu, the child is mine. Now whatever she said was right. Even if she wanted the moon and the stars in the sky, Lao Can would pluck them for her. He turned on the windshield wipers and started the car slowly. He said in a low voice, Huan Huan, bear with it. I'm driving slowly. The spring rain was heavy, and it was foggy at night, so visibility was extremely low. For the sake of safety, he didn't dare to drive too fast. Pei Huan sat in the back seat and howled. Can Ming Zhu, you did it on purpose. You bastard, you're clearly trying to hurt me to death. If Lao Can was in front of her, she would definitely pluck out all of his xiong fur. Sweat broke out on Lao Can's forehead, even though he was naked and not wearing a single piece of clothing. Can Ming Zhu, I know you want me to die and let that old woman be the child's stepmother, right? Let me tell you, don't even think about it. Pei Huan was in pain, she was angry, and she wanted to scold someone. Perhaps she knew deep down that Lao Can wouldn't talk back no matter how she scolded him. Chapter 1033. Xiaomei was worried, but she couldn't help but laugh. This couple was really melodramatic. There was no one else. In Xiaomei's opinion, Pei Huan was the most suitable person for old Kansas. Although Pei Huan thought she was smart, she was actually a very silly girl. She was a perfect match for a man like old Kansas. As for Sumo, Xiaomei had been in the industry for several years. She knew Sumo's tricks. Oldkin wouldn't be happy with a woman like her. Pei Huan's pain was getting more and more obvious. She was already a delicate girl, and she was crying. When they reached the hospital, the elevator broke down. It was the 20th floor. Oldkin carried her up one floor at a time. When they reached the 20th floor, his arms were about to break, and his legs were trembling. Because it was a natural birth, only one member of the family was allowed in. In the end, Oldkin went in. He wore the sterilized clothes provided by the hospital. He was too big to buckle up, so he could only leave them open. Pei Huan grabbed Oldkin's arm, gasped in pain, and screamed. The nurse had never seen a man who could make him squint and scream like this. She rolled her eyes a few times, but Pei Huan screamed even louder. The nurse was really annoyed by her high-pitched screams. She snorted. "Did you scream like this when you were happy?" He squinted. Pei Huan opened her eyes and glared at the nurse. How dare he provoke her like this when she was pregnant? Pei Huan screamed even louder. She grabbed Oldkin's xiong fur with her two little claws and pulled hard. The doctors and nurses who delivered the baby were all stunned by his narrowed eyes. He was grabbing a handful of xiong's fur. However, Oldkin acted as if he had scratched an itch on his body. He coaxed his little baby without a change in expression. "Be a good girl. Don't cry. You can scream as much as you want." He then glared at the nurse. The nurse was shocked. The strong man in front of her had arms thicker than her thighs. He could probably snap her in half. She didn't dare to glare at Pei Huan anymore. The man in front of her was too fierce. However, Oldkin was extremely gentle to Pei Huan. He let Pei Huan pull out all his xiong fur. That wasn't all. He put his hand on his belt. "Huan, don't pull anymore." What the fuck? The nurse was about to vomit. Who gave birth like this? No matter how melodramatic it was, Pei Huan's child was born. It took a full 4 hours. It was a son. Oldkin was a straight man. When he hugged his son, he was so emotional that he cried. He kissed the child's mother gently. Huan, you've given birth to a son for our Oldkin family." Pei Huan was still in good spirits. After getting up and drinking half a bowl of nourishing soup, she became even more energetic. "My son is mine. It has nothing to do with your Oldkin family." Although she said that, her eyes were red because she had plucked all of Lao Kin's xiong fur, and his skin was swollen. Lao Kin followed her gaze and chuckled. Huan, it's okay. It doesn't hurt. It will grow back in the future, just like a beard. It's not sexy anymore." She had just become a mother, and she was even more willful than before. But in Lao Kin's ears, it sounded like she was being shameless. His Huan still cared whether he was sexy or not. "If you want to see, then look down there. There's more down there." As he spoke, Little May coughed to express her speechlessness. Chapter 1034. Pei Huan snorted. "Who wants to see it?" Oldkin hugged the child and didn't know how to coax him. Little May watched and knew what to do. She quietly retreated. Oldkin's skin thickened after everyone was gone. At that moment, his son started crying. "This kid must be hungry. Let's ask mommy for food." Oldkin, who had only become a father at the age of 38, coaxed his son. He gently placed the child in Pei Huan's arms and looked at her. "I'm hungry." Pei Huan ignored him. She held her son in her arms and carefully unbuttoned her shirt. That little thing was born with a natural instinct. It immediately gobbled it up and swallowed it in big mouthfuls. That voice and that erotic scene made Lao Kin's eyes turn green, emitting a glossy green light. He looked at her eagerly. He swallowed his saliva. He would rather be a tortoise now. At least he would have milk to drink. God knew how long it had been since he last touched a woman. He hadn't touched his Huan. When he was with Suimo tried to seduce him a few times. She even took off her sexy pajamas right in front of him, but he didn't waver at all. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He was an experienced man, and he didn't even flinch. To be honest, Pei Huan was really not good-looking now. Women who had just given birth were always a little haggard, but her whole body had a kind of maternal brilliance, which was very charming. Oldkin was an artist, and he knew that she was touched. Because he was touched, he felt that she was extremely attractive and even desired her. The little person in Pei Huan's arms ate with all its might. After finishing one, it quickly raised its bean-like eyes and looked at Pei Huan eagerly. Pei Huan looked at the wrinkled face and liked it a lot. Then, she changed her position. Old Can's eyes glowed even more when she changed her position. He wanted to swallow her whole. Pei Huan looked at her son with satisfaction. But after looking at him for a while, she wasn't satisfied anymore. Because this son looked like Can Mingzhu. He was just born, but the hair on his cheeks was already obvious. He would definitely grow a beard when he grew up. Pei Huan looked up and glared at Old Kansas. She didn't feel good. Old Can wanted to cry. Did he offend this young madam again? After Pei Huan fed her son, she said in a low voice, Can Mingzhu, give your son a name. Old Can's heart skipped a beat. He squatted down piously and looked at his wife and child with gentle eyes. He asked carefully, what's their surname? He did not dare to use the surname Can on his own, or she would be angry again. Pei Huan said unhappily, if I tell you to get up, then get up. Why do you have so much nonsense to say? Old Can was overjoyed. He simply could not believe it. Was she really letting him get up? What do you think of Qingxing? Old Can felt that he was a pearl and his son was a star. They were quite compatible. Pei Huan didn't say anything, so Old Can couldn't figure out if this lady liked him or not. He was very anxious. Pei Huan looked at him and snorted. If your surname is Can, it's better to call you Kardashian. Old Can swallowed hard. He could sacrifice his son for his wife. The bearded man's facial muscles trembled as he smiled. That's a good name. What a good name. Pei Huan couldn't help but roll her eyes. Silly. Giving birth is so painful. This dead man, he actually didn't come to comfort her. Did he really think that she was a female warrior? Old Can's breathing became lighter. Then, he gently placed the child on the small bed, bent over, and lifted the blanket. He couldn't wait to eat his son's food. At this moment, the nurse pushed the door open and saw this scene. Chapter 1036. Old Can swallowed another mouthful of saliva, then released it reluctantly. The nurse was embarrassed. She had been an obstetrics nurse for 3 or 4 years, but this was the first time she had seen such a scene. This couple was so loving. Old Can licked his lips, feeling satisfied but not satisfied physically as he stood up. The nurse checked Pei Huan's body and recorded everything. When she reached a certain point, the nurse paused and then said meaningfully, the milk has opened, and the method is for the husband to suck. Even someone as thick-skinned as Pei Huan blushed and glared daggers at Old Kansas. Old Can scratched his head and chuckled. Then, he went to hug his son. Dad is willing to do anything for our Qingxing. How shameless could he be? The nurse rolled her eyes. Watching Old Can kiss the baby, she couldn't help but say, Sir, newborns are very fragile. Your lips may have bacteria, which may infect the newborn. Old Can was still kissing his son and said casually, my son takes after me. He's strong. Besides, we were just having dinner together. Isn't that right, little Qingxing? The nurse was stunned. Pei Huan couldn't help but yell at him. Can Mingzhu put down our son? Old Can looked at her pitifully, but he put down his son obediently. The nurse burst into laughter. The patient is in good spirits. Putting away the records, she said seriously. Anyway, you can't have sex for 42 days. You have to wait until the test is confirmed, understand? Pei Huan nodded, blushing. Old Can touched his nose. I've been abstinent for almost 10 months. In any case, Old Can and Pei Huan had reconciled. Xiaomei was happy for them and couldn't wait to call Pei Qiqi early in the morning. Pei Qiqi was shocked. She had given birth after only one night of no contact. She hurriedly broke free from Tang Yu and ran into the changing room to change her clothes, like a whirlwind. Tang Yu followed her and picked out a bright yellow dress for her. He carried her onto Xiao Sha's lap and helped her put it on. He scolded, you're already so big, yet you're still so careless. He was referring to the time when she ran around without shoes. Pei Qiqi also lowered her head and looked at her own feet. Then, she hugged Tang Yu, not caring if she was half-dressed or not. Her little hand hung around his neck as she looked at him tenderly. Her voice was also sweet. Pei Huan gave birth to a son. You're walking barefoot just because of this? He patted her but disapprovingly, then leaned over to her ear and said in a low voice, "The next time I find out, I'll punish you the same way I punish you." She raised her head and looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. He smiled. "All right, put on your clothes and I'll send you there. But Chi-Chi, have you thought about what to give him?" Although he didn't like Pei Huan, it was fine as long as Chi-Chi liked him. Pei Chi-Chi let him put on her clothes as she tried hard to think. A house? Pei Chi-Chi looked at Tang Yu and asked seriously. Tang Yu patted her little head. "Very good, this is very upstart. You bought me for 100 million. Pei Chi-Chi, who was being mocked, jumped up and hugged his waist. Tang Yu laughed. "This is different." Chapter 1037. Tang Yu curled his lips and looked at his little fellow. "This is probably the only time in a lifetime, because no other girl would be so bold as to seduce me when I'm drunk." Pei Chi-Chi punched him angrily. Her whole body hung on his body, and she lowered her head to bite his shoulder. He was only wearing a bathrobe. If they were to play like this, his bathrobe would be open soon. It wouldn't be able to cover anything. Pei Chi-Chi covered her eyes and said coquettishly, "Tang Yu, put on your clothes." He smiled and kissed her. He pulled her hand away and kissed her eyes. Pei Chi-Chi screamed and struggled to escape. She kept clinging to him and pushed her against the closet. At this moment, Pei Chi-Chi's long black hair was draped over her thin shoulders. The dress he had picked for her was long gone. She was practically sitting on him and could feel his change. His clear eyes were filled with some kind of intention. Pei Chi-Chi became rascally. She wrapped her little hands around his neck and said coquettishly, "We agreed to see Pei Huan and the child." He leaned forward and kissed her ear, murmuring, "Then we'll just do it once." With that said, he started to move. Pei Chi-Chi screamed and hugged him tightly like a little lamb. "Tang Yu, hurry up." "Hurry up?" The man who was already behaving like a beast in the morning raised his brows. Then, as she wished, "Hurry up," and "Hurry up," Pei Chi-Chi screamed again and again, her voice trembling. "Tang Yu, I didn't mean that. Hurry up." He nibbled her little ear and teased her. "Which one are you talking about then? Chi-Chi, HM? I just want it to be faster." She bit her lip and looked at him pitifully with tears in her eyes. "I just want to end it earlier." Tang Yu chuckled. "It might be difficult. Chi-Chi, you might be able to say something nice." Pei Chi-Chi looked at him resentfully before hugging him. She whispered in his ear, praising how amazing he was. She called him Big Brother and Daddy in a soft voice. She thought that he would let her go. But the more she behaved like this, the hotter Tang Yu felt and the more he lashed out at her. Pei Chi-Chi angrily punched him, bit him, and scolded him with all kinds of nasty words. Tang Yu carried her into the bedroom and threw her onto the luxurious bed. He knelt in front of her and propped himself up on both sides of her body. He stared at her with his dark eyes and curled his lips. "Pei Chi-Chi, you're dead meat." She screamed and closed her eyes. Then she turned her little face to the side helplessly. "Tang Yu, you're bad." His heart softened and he kissed her little mouth. "All right, I'll let you go." She opened her eyes and looked at him. His eyes were full of tenderness. Pei Chi-Chi was a little hesitant again. She hooked her little foot around him and bit her little finger. "What about you?" "I'll settle it myself." It was rare for him to be so hoarse. Just as he was about to get off the bed, she hugged him and refused to let him go. "Chi-Chi." He patted her little hand helplessly. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was red. She hugged him and leaned down. She pressed her little face against his lower abdomen and said in a very low voice, "I'll help you." Tang Yu could not believe his good luck. He suppressed the throbbing of his body and stared at her. Pei Chi-Chi raised her little face and looked at him sadly. "Go and wash up." Tang Yu was ecstatic. He felt that today was a good day. He quickly went to the bathroom to wash up and came back to lie down. Mr. Tang was very satisfied with this morning. Chapter 1038. Tang Yu was satisfied. He had enjoyed it today, but he hadn't let her go in the end. He couldn't help feeling a burst of passion when he thought of how she had begged him in a soft voice. Pei Chi ignored him along the way. It wasn't until he drove the car to a law firm that she was stunned. She looked at him and said, "We're going to the hospital. What are we doing here?" Tang Yu unbuckled his seatbelt and explained, "Didn't you say you were going to give me a gift?" He turned his head and smiled, then got out of the car. There was already a lawyer waiting in the law firm. He handed a document to Tang Yu. Tang Yu got into the car quickly and put the document on Pei Chi's lap. He buckled his seatbelt and started the car. Pei Chi opened the document in surprise. After reading it, she smiled and said, "It's indeed a big gift." She had already returned Bo Yi's shares to Tang Yu, returning them to their rightful owner. However, she hadn't expected that Tang Yu would give Pei Huan 1% of the shares. 1% was worth billions of yuan. How generous. Pei Chi didn't have any objections. She put the document away and heard Tang Yu say softly, not only for Pei Huan's child, but also for Qin Mingzhu. That year, Qin Mingzhu had brought Chi out of the darkness, and he was very grateful. Pei Chi smiled. He already has the best gift. She paused for a moment and said, "They've made up. I went to bed early last night, and Pei Huan was about to give birth. Old Qin sent her to the hospital." She stretched lazily, and her expression was especially gentle. "I'm really grateful for this rain. I'm grateful that I got sick." Tang Yu reached out and touched her hair. "Silly child." Pei Chi also smiled, and there was a strange light in her eyes. She pressed her little face against his arm and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I feel so good now." His heart softened. He didn't say anything and just let her lean on him. When he arrived at the hospital, he saw Pei Huan, Lao Can, and Qin Shing seeing them together again. Pei Chi's eyes were a little hot. This was what she wanted very much, but she didn't dare to tell Pei Huan. It was really good now. When Old Qin saw the gift for his son's birth, he was shocked. He said that it was too expensive and refused to accept it. Pei Huan said calmly, "Take it. As long as it's from Chi, you can accept it." Pei Chi smiled. "It's Tang Yu's idea." Pei Huan was about to explode. It was Tang Yu's intention. The corner of her mouth twitched a little because she felt a little uncomfortable. She had seduced Tang Yu in the past. Pei Chi ruffled her hair. "Look, you're being silly again. Didn't you say that the past is in the past?" Tears welled up in Pei Huan's eyes. Pei Chi couldn't help but pat her. "Don't cry." Lao Can hurried over like an old mother. Finally, after coaxing the noble lady, he could finally hold his baby for everyone to admire. Lao Can asked happily, "How is it? Can I look at it?" "It's very handsome," Pei Chi said against her will. Because newborn babies were all wrinkled, only Lao Can thought it was good-looking. Old Can's heart was filled with joy, and he was extremely satisfied. Pei Huan was the only one who didn't say anything. "It's obviously like you. It's not good-looking at all." Lao Can was deeply shocked. He was afraid that the newborn child could understand. His IQ was 0 at this time, so he quickly coaxed the child. "Mom is just talking nonsense. Our Qin Shing is the most handsome and good-looking." Pei Chi frowned and suddenly said something surprising. "Pei Huan, your son's name." Chapter 1039. What's wrong with the name? Pei Huan's gaze fell on Old Kansas. She thought to herself, how could a newborn kid be so amused? Pei Chi held back her laughter. "Your son's name, Qin Shing and Mao Xing. Why do they sound so similar?" Even Tang Yu's lips curled up slightly as he reached out to stroke Chi-Chi's hair. "Stop pulling." But Pei Huan was furious. She used to be ridiculed by the media because she didn't have any works on the red carpet. How dare Lao Can make such a name? "Qin Mingzhu, you must have done it on purpose." Pei Huan roared. If she could get out of bed, she would have torn Lao Can apart. Lao Can looked at Pei Chi sadly. "I didn't mean that." Pei Huan cried. "That's what you meant. Qin Mingzhu, I almost fell into your trap. You're going to use my son's name to laugh at me for not having any works for the rest of my life. Isn't our Qin Shing your work?" Old Qin thought that this was a very good line of love, But Pei Huan cried out again. You still dare to say blanket star? How dare you? Can Mingzhu? I'm going to kill you. Pei Chi and Tang Yu couldn't stop laughing. Pei Chi quietly nudged Tang Yu and whispered, Look, isn't she becoming more and more like Zhou Meilin? Tang Yu was a man and a noble man, so he wouldn't easily comment on a woman. He just smiled and reached out to pinch her little face. Naughty. Pei Chi hugged his arm and said coquettishly, I'm doing it for Pei Huan's sake. I can't only find out when I'm 50 or 60 years old. How bad does Mao Xing sound? She looked up and smiled coquettishly. Tang Yu's heart was like a spring breeze. However, what happened next made Lao Can feel depressed. When Lin Jinrong went to the hospital for a follow-up, he met Xiao Mei and found out that Pei Huan had given birth. Out of politeness, Lin Jinrong asked his secretary to bring a bouquet of lilies and a piece of mutton-fat white jade, which was quite expensive. Old Can was a tough man, but now he was as narrow-minded as a needle. He stared at Pei Huan eagerly. Pei Huan asked Little Mei to send 2 sets of happy eggs to Lin Jinrong's secretary. After she left, she picked up the bouquet of flowers and took a deep sniff. It smells so good. Little Mei helped me arrange it. Old Ken was very dissatisfied. This flower is plain and doesn't look happy at all. It won't look good in the delivery room. Xiao Mei smiled. Lily is a sedative. Pei Huan wanted to provoke Lao Kansas. She looked at him and said, he doesn't have any aesthetic sense. Old Can was unconvinced. I'm a cameraman. But you still have no sense of beauty. Otherwise, why would you fall for an old woman like Suimo? This was Pei Huan's little idea, but she was not stupid enough to say it out loud. Old Can stiffened his neck. In the end, he softened. Fine, fine, fine. If you think it's good, then stay. Old Can did not have the right to speak. He wiped away his tears and his heart. He had no status now. It was already a blessing for him to be able to be a nanny. After the 2 men went out for a smoke, Pei Chi finally had a chance to talk to Pei Huan. She sat by the bed and covered Pei Huan with the blanket. Pei Huan looked blissful as she let go. Have you made up your mind? Pei Chi looked at her. Pei Huan nodded. Yes, Chi. I've made up my mind. Pei Chi smiled. Since you've made up your mind, then live a good life. Old Ken is a good person. Chapter 1040. Pei Huan understood what she was trying to say and responded with a grunt. Pei Chi smiled. Live a good life in the future. You don't lack money. Don't work in the entertainment industry. That bowl of rice doesn't taste good. All you see is Yi Liangxiu, the heavenly Queen Yi. She's in such a high position. If she doesn't obey King Entertainment, she'll be frozen. Pei Huan was silent for a while. Chi, I know what Tang Yu means. She raised her eyes and looked at Pei Chi. He really cares about you. He cares about the people around you and the people you care about. He's quietly taking care of the top-up card. Pei Chi smiled. Your old Ken is a good person too. He loves you. Seeing that Pei Huan was silent, he patted the back of her hand and said, Don't mention the past, especially Suimo. Even Lao Ken could let it go, so why can't you? Pei Huan suddenly got up and hugged Pei Chi's arm. Chi, I really want to call you Mom. Pei Chi had a look of disdain on her face. Pei Huan, you shameless person. I'm clearly younger than you by a few months. It's one thing for you to call me sister, but you still want me to be your mother. Although what she wanted to do now was to be a mother. Pei Chi happened to be there. In the end, she and Old Ken agreed to get married when the child was 2 months old. They didn't want to stay in a hotel suite. After all, it would be inconvenient to have a child. Instead, they would stay in Pei Huan's villa. Old Can was a little disappointed that their honeymoon was over. However, on further thought, they could consummate their marriage in 2 months. He felt better. On the other hand, Pei Huan didn't care as long as she had a son. It was already 4 or 5 in the afternoon when Pei Chi and Tang Yu left. They held hands. Mrs. Tang, where do you want to go? When are you marrying me? Under the setting sun, a beautiful girl was hugging a handsome man on the streets of B City. They stood next to a top-of-the-line sports car and attracted a lot of attention. Pei Chi pouted, looking very innocent. She did not look like Boss Pei at all. Tang Yu looked at her. His gaze was deep, and there was a tinge of affection in his eyes. He smiled faintly. Pei Chi, I suddenly feel that it's good to live together illegally. She glared at him, but her eyes were filled with coquettishness. Tang Yu smiled faintly and reached out to hold her in his arms. He closed his eyes and said, Chi, how can I bear to do that? How could he bear to let her follow him without a name? She buried her head in his arms and thumped his shoulders with her small hands. Then she said somewhat meaningfully, now I know the benefits of not having a xiongmao. Tang Yu looked at her. Pei Chi smiled softly. When Pei Huan gave birth, she plucked out all of Lao Can's xiong hair. Tang Yu looked at her. So, Tang Yu, it's a good thing that you don't have a xiongmao. Pei Chi held back her laughter as she opened the car door and got into the car. Tang Yu was stunned. Then, he shook his head and got into the car as well. He buckled his seatbelt slowly and looked at the little girl with an indescribable satisfaction in his heart. At that moment, his Chi was like an ordinary girl. He suddenly said, Chi, do you want to continue going to school? Pei Chi was stunned for a moment. Then, she felt a little emotional as she recalled that she did not get her graduation certificate from B University. She felt as though she had been in a different world. After a while, she said softly, we'll talk about it in the future. Tang Yu saw that she looked a little sad and knew that she was thinking about the unhappy past. He smiled faintly. That's true. Miss Pei's most important task in life is to propose to Mr. Tang. Tang Yu. She called his name angrily. Tang Yu had already started the car. Isn't it? Chapter 1041. As the days passed, Pei Huan was discharged from the hospital and lived a simple life with Lao Kansas. Tang Yu took over Boyi easily, but Pei Chi was so busy that her feet barely touched the ground. Other than her personal ability, it was also because Shen Lian had made a mess of Jin Taihe. Pei Chi was busy for a month before she could sort out some clues. When she took over, Xiaowen followed her. Xiaowen was a capable assistant and helped a lot. After a month, Pei Chi felt like a dead dog. It was a rare Sunday morning. She lay in Tang Yu's arms and felt that his big palm was a little restless. She knew him well. Her little hand reached under the quilt and grabbed him. Her voice was muffled. Tang Yu, no. I'm so tired. She said it pitifully, hoping that he would let her go. Tang Yu patted her and held her with one hand. He propped his body up a little and leaned against the headboard. He pinched her little face. On Friday, you said it was Saturday. On Saturday, you said it was this morning. Pei Chi, I haven't had sex for 5 days. Beast. Her hair was messy like a little lunatic. Her little face was buried in his arms, and her hands were hugging his waist. Her voice was muffled. Tang Yu, I'm so tired. He grabbed her little head and lowered his head to kiss her. Pei Chi dodged him and screamed with all her might. No. The more she struggled, the more beastly he became. He held her slender little arm and dragged her into his arms. He bit her little ear. I want it now. Chi, you can't escape. She bit her lip and obediently raised her little face to let him kiss her. Seeing how obedient she was, he impolitely kissed her. With one hand on her little head, he used the other to push aside the messy hair on her face. He kissed her deeply, their lips and teeth entangled. His kiss was too deep. She could only swallow and breathe with difficulty with him. Her tender little body sat in his arms. She could feel the strength of him. It was as if he could tear her apart at any time. Tang Yu, I'm afraid. Her voice was broken. Be good, I will be gentle. He coaxed her and was about to do it with her. The door opened with a bang, and a childish voice rang out. Kuj. Xiaoxin was wearing a milky white lace dress, staring at Kuj and her sister with her mouth agape. Why aren't they wearing clothes? Next to little Xiaoxin was little Zhao Yin, dressed like a little gentleman, looking very arrogant. Little Xiaoxin's mouth turned into an O shape, while little Zhao Yan's eyes widened. The two babies looked curiously at the two adults on the big bed. They seemed to have seen this scene before. It seemed to be in a comic book. Xiaoxin's voice was crisp and clear. Yin Yin, are they fighting with the fairies? Little Zhao Yin shook his head. I don't think so. I think they are comparing martial arts. He had been reading a martial arts comic book recently. It's a fight between fairies. It's a fight between martial arts. Brother is using a move. Little Zhao Yin scratched his head. He could not think of anything. A fight between fairies. A fight between martial arts. On the bed, Tang Yu's face darkened. He quickly covered himself and Pei Chi-Chi with the quilt. After a while, he scolded the two curious babies at the door. Go downstairs. Who let them come up? Chapter 1042. Poor little Zhao Yan. Even though Xiaoxin is older by 2 months, he still says she is his little sister and always gives in to his little sister. Even the one who suffers fiercely is him. Little Zhao Yin made an "oh" sound, not daring to challenge Tang Yu's authority. But the pampered Xiaoxin dared. The little person wearing a little skirt flew over like a wisp of smoke. The little hand lifted the quilt at once. Poor Tang Yu, who was preparing to exercise hard, was scared to death. At this moment, Tang Yu, for the first time, felt what it meant to have nothing to live for. But the little person in front of him who was giggling was his own daughter. He glared at Xiaoxin, but Xiaoxin was not afraid of Kuj at all, and even turned her head to continue the discussion with little Zhao Yan. It's a fight between demons. Look at the one who doesn't even wear clothes when fighting. Zhao Yin touched his head, feeling that what Xiaoxin said was very reasonable. Tang Yu felt that this sex life was simply unbearable. He immediately put on his bathrobe, jumped out of bed, and carried them downstairs, one in each hand. Downstairs, Lin Yun, Zhao Yi, and even Tang Ziyuan were also there. Today, they actually came to discuss Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi's wedding date. Just now, Xiaoxin went upstairs to call them, but now they saw the male lead carrying them downstairs, one in each hand. Tang Yu quickly threw them to Lin Yun, his voice simple. Sit first, I'll come down in an hour. Did it take an hour to wear clothes? Everyone present was a little puzzled. At this moment, Xiaoxin's big eyes flashed with tears. Kuj is bullying big sister. They are fighting with demons. Little Zhao Yin inherited Zhao Yi's calmness. The 2 or 3-year-old child nodded in agreement. I can testify. The adults all laughed, and also understood why Tang Yu lost his composure just now. Really, that is not a fight between demons. Lin Yun held back her laughter. Kuj and big sister are working hard to give Xiaoxin a little sister. Xiaoxin's eyes twinkled like little stars. The little fellow was very smart. She tilted her little head and asked softly, Can Kuj and big sister have children? Aren't they close relatives? Also, our children should call me Andy. The adults laughed again, not knowing how to explain it. At the very least, Tang Yu should be the one to explain it to Xiaoxin. However, Tang Yu felt that it would be better for Lin Yun to explain it to Xiaoxin, so no one had ever told Xiaoxin about her background. Upstairs, Tang Yu returned to his bedroom. This time, he locked the door. He walked up to her softly and pulled her into his arms. His big hands moved down shamelessly as he closed his eyes and chuckled. The baby is still waiting for me. Pei Chi-Chi heard the noise downstairs and knew that Lin Yun was coming. She didn't want to do it with him, so she patted him and said, No, get up. However, he ignored her and carried her to the balcony. From here, they could easily hear the sound from downstairs. Tang Yu, you're crazy. Her little hand hit his shoulder, and her voice was very soft, for fear that he would hear it. Tang Yu chuckled softly, his big palm pressed down on her, and there was a touch of indulgence in his dark eyes. Lower your voice later. She hugged him shamelessly, bit her little mouth and said in a low voice, Tang Yu, go back to bed. Our baby likes to do it on the bed. He chuckled and carried her back to the bed as she wished. The soft mattress sunk deep into his body. In less than half an hour, it had been ruined beyond recognition by him. His ferocity seemed to make up for a week's worth of food. Pei Chi-Chi would rather go to work. Chapter 1043. Lin Yun and the others waited for an hour, 2 hours, and finally, when Tang Yu came down for lunch, Pei Chi-Chi couldn't get up and fell asleep. The two men shook their heads in disapproval, as they watched Tang Yu come down in a refreshed manner. Lin Yun also felt embarrassed. He was almost 30 years old. Couldn't he control himself a little? Let's eat. Tang Yu was in a good mood. He walked up to his mother and naturally lowered his head to kiss her on the cheek. Lin Yun laughed. You still know to come down. Tang Yu smiled faintly. His noble demeanor did not diminish in the slightest. It's rare for me to rest. He paused. Chi-Chi has been very busy recently. She works late every night. I should spend more time with her. All right, the adults all understood in an instant. At the dining table, Lin Yun talked about the wedding. Tang Yu thought for a moment. I've discussed it with Chi-Chi. We plan to hold the party on Chi-Chi's cruise ship. The ceremony will be simple. Lin Yun and Tang Ziyun looked at each other and said gently, That's good. I'm afraid it will take some time to convince the old man. Tang Yu smiled. I'll do it. Lin Yun thought about it and agreed. Her son was the best way to deal with the old man. Then, Lin Yun thought of something and asked Tang Yu, How's Shan? Tang Yu sighed. It's fine. It's just that Mrs. Shun has lost a lot of weight because of Shen Lian. Her spirit is not the same as before. After all, she had been through a few blows and it was beyond her mental endurance. Lin Yun nodded. It's been hard on her. I heard that Shen Lian is going to be sent to a nursing home abroad. Tang Ziyuan felt a bit upset in his heart. After all, he and Shen Zhongshan used to be friends, and he had never mentioned that Shen Zhongshan and Zhao Ku had such a thing. If he had mentioned it, he would never have married Zhao Ku. Later, Tang Xian was still Shen Zhongshan's child. In the end, Tang Ziyuan was the biggest fool. He had lost Lin Yun for nothing. At this time, Tang Yu nodded. Yes, Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shun have decided to immigrate and may not come back again. Shen Zhongshan's attendance at their wedding was the last gift to Chi-Chi. Shen Zhongshan gave Jin Taihe to pay Chi-Chi and the rest of his life to Mrs. Shen and Shen Lian. He went back to the beginning and used the rest of his life to atone for their sins. This was also one reason why Mrs. Shun was so calm. But Tang Yu knew that Shen Zhongshan did this partly for Pei Chi-Chi. He wanted to bring Shen Lian away so that Chi-Chi would not be in danger anymore. Chi-Chi knew that he was doing this for her, but she could not say it out loud. Later, Tang Ziyuan found Shen Zhongshan for a drink. Shen Zhongshan couldn't drink, so he used tea to apologize to Tang Ziyuan. Tang Ziyuan waved his hand and said calmly, What are you talking about? He looked at Shen Zhongshan's slightly obese appearance and sighed. Brother Zhongshan, if that woman, Zhao Ku, were to come back to life and see you like this, do you think she would still be so loyal to you? Shen Zhongshan's old face fell. He smiled helplessly and took a sip of tea. Ziyuan, why are you mocking me again? It's been so many years. His gaze was deep. Fine, let's just say it. We old friends may not have the chance to talk like this in the future. Tang Ziyuan quietly filled his cup with tea. Chapter 1044. Shen Zhongshan continued, If it was, I wouldn't have blamed it on you. When you told me that you wanted to marry Zhao Ku, she was already pregnant. You thought it was your child, so I didn't think much of it. And that child was destined to be pitiful. Shen Zhongshan's eyes welled up with tears when he thought of Tang Xian. This was one of the reasons why he couldn't forgive Shen Lian. He watched Tang Xian grow up. She was such a cute little girl. Even if she wasn't Shen Lian's sister, he couldn't treat her like that. Tang Ziyuan's heart was also touched. He took a big gulp of wine. Even though I know Tang Xian isn't my biological daughter, I still love her. No one would not love her. She's so cute. The two men clinked their glasses and drank up the bitterness in their hearts. They wiped the wine off their lips and sighed. They didn't know when they would meet again. Tang Ziyuan was drunk at Shen Zhongshan's place. Half awake, he sensed Mrs. Shun coming over to persuade Shen Zhongshan to sleep. At that moment, Tang Ziyuan's heart felt cold. He couldn't describe the feeling. He wanted to tell Shen Zhongshan to chat for a while longer, but he felt it was too abrupt. In the end, Tang Ziyuan left first. He stumbled into the car, and the driver sent him back to Yanhui. Yanhui, the time for swallows to return. But the person in his heart would never come back. Tang Ziyuan went upstairs and sat in Tang Xian's bedroom for the whole night. He didn't even know how he fell asleep. When he woke up, the sky was still bright. The frogs and cicadas outside were disturbing his dreams. He couldn't sleep anymore. Tang Ziyuan's heart was already desolate. He remembered what Yunyan told him the other day. Find a partner. But what kind of partner? He liked young and beautiful girls in the past, but now they were just like that. If he didn't open his heart to her, he would just be a stranger living under the same house. Tang Ziyuan got up and stood in Tang Xian's bedroom. He missed her very much. If Tang Xian was here, even if she wasn't his daughter, as long as she was here, she could always accompany him. How good would that be? He wouldn't be so lonely. He stood there until the sun rose, thinking about Tang Xian, thinking about the time when she called him daddy. Tang Ziyuan felt that he was old and did not want to find another woman to have children with. Unlike Lin Yun and Zhao Yi, who already had a granddaughter like Xian, these two old bastards even gave birth to a little Zhao Yin. Old pervert. Tang Ziyuan sighed in his heart. He was the only one left, and he would die alone. Early in the morning, Tang Ziyuan stood on the balcony and looked at the mist in the distance. Thinking back on his life, he still felt regret. Perhaps the loneliness he felt now was the price he had to pay for what he had done in the past. It was the price Chongshan had to pay. They had all fallen because of Zhao Ku, but they were still here. The one who suffered the most was Tang Xian, that innocent child. The servant carefully pushed open the bedroom door. Sir? Tang Ziyuan was still standing with his back to her. He said softly, Today is Tang Xian's birthday. Don't forget to cook some noodles for her birthday. The eyes of the servants in the house reddened. Everyone knew that Tang Xian was not Sir's child, but Sir still loved her very much. Even when he passed away, he would not forget her birthday. Sir, you treat the young lady very well, the servant said. Tang Ziyuan sighed softly. Okay. He did not think that he had spent too little time with her when Tang Xian was still alive. Chapter 1045. Every Friday night, Tang Yu would take Pei Chi-Chi to Lin Yun's place for a meal, and then bring Xiaoxin back to Rose Garden for 2 days. Although she was very happy to be with Xiaoxin and made up for Pei Chi-Chi's previous regrets, she was very upset because Xiaoxin still called her sister, Tang Yu Kush. Early in the morning, Pei Chi-Chi was lying in Tang Yu's arms, and Xiaoxin was sleeping soundly on the side. Xiaoxin was wearing a one-piece pajamas, the kind with animal patterns on the bottom. The little fellow slept soundly. Her breath was also sweet, and she made that kind of throwing sound, so adorable. Pei Chi-Chi was lying in Tang Yu's arms, watching Xiaoxin sleep. She could not get tired of looking at that beautiful and delicate little face. Her voice was soft. Tang Yu, did you tell Xiaoxin that I am her mother? In fact, Tang Yu recently had a feeling that his mother might not have said it, but hoped that he would say it. So until now, no one had told Xiaoxin. He smiled faintly, reached out and touched her little head. How does our Chi-Chi look like a little mother? When Pei Chi-Chi heard this, she knew that he did not say it. She pouted and poked his lower abdomen with her little hand. Tang Yu, we will get married in half a month. Do you want Xiaoxin to call us Sister Kuj in front of friends and family? It is very embarrassing. He let her poke him, indulging and doting. Then now we wake her up and tell her that we are father and mother? No. Pei Chi-Chi was reluctant. That little fellow was asleep. So cute. She couldn't help but look over again. Xiaoxin yawned and turned over. Even the way she turned over was so cute, her little butt facing her. There was a little cow on the little butt of the pajamas, staring at Pei Chi-Chi with its 2 big eyes. I don't care. You have to explain to her today. She pinched his chin and sat on him. Tang Yu grabbed her little hand, his eyes bright. Chi-Chi, why don't you say it? I think Xiaoxin will be very happy if you tell her. What if she doesn't listen to me? After all, she has been by your side for much longer than I have. Pei Chi-Chi was a little dejected. Then, she grabbed his hand and bit it angrily. It was all his fault, all his fault. Tang Yu coaxed her, but she has eaten. He didn't say the rest of his words. He just scanned a certain part of her body with his eyes. Pei Chi immediately covered her mouth. Tang Yu, you're shameless. If you care about face, then you don't have a heart. Originally, the two were just joking, but at this moment, Tang Yu was a little emotional. Just when he was about to press down the little mother of the child to fight with the vixen, Xiaoxin woke up. The little person climbed up from the bed, her eyes rolling around, staring at Tang Yu and Pei Chi. Kuj, what are you guys doing? Tang Yu carried the little guy on his body, holding the fat little guy in his hands. Kuj and sister are fighting with the vixen. Tang Yu. Pei Chi blushed. He was teaching the child bad things. Tang Yu gave her a look to calm down, then patiently talked to Xiaoxin about the common physiological knowledge. As he talked, Pei Chi laughed and covered her mouth. You talk to her slowly. I'm going to brush my teeth. Well, in the future, Xiaoxin's sex education can be handed over to the child's father. Chapter 1046. Xiaoxin laid on Kuz's body and asked in a soft and adorable voice, Kuj, does that mean that once Kuz tadpoles enter Chi-Chi's body, they can become babies? Xiaoxin's little face turned into a pancake in an instant, and her eyes widened in disbelief. It turned out that when Kuj and her sister were fighting in the vixen, Kuj had shot a hidden weapon at her sister. No wonder her sister would cry. It must have been very painful. How pitiful. Xiaoxin revealed a sympathetic gaze. Tang Yu was amused. He reached out to stroke Xiaoxin's soft and delicate little curly hair and dropped a bombshell. Xiaoxin was created by Kuj and her sister like this. Xiaoxin's eyes widened as she stared at Tang Yu. She was a smart child. After Tang Yu had said so much, this little person would naturally overthink. For example, many people usually said that she didn't look that much like little Zhao Yan, and some people said that she looked like Kuj. Was she really the hidden weapon Kuj used to hit her sister? Tears welled up in Xiaoxin's eyes, and like crystals, they fell to the ground. I am not a hidden weapon. Xiaoxin is not a hidden weapon. Tang Yu was stunned. This wasn't the main point, all right? Although he was eager to tell her the truth, he still couldn't bear to let Xiaoxin cry. It was better to coax her first. Xiaoxin cried her heart out in his arms. Her plump little body lay in his arms, and her chubby little feet hooked around his waist. Tang Yu's heart melted. Papa! Xiaoxin's little face rested on his shoulder. She cried and said in a soft voice, Xiaoxin is not a hidden weapon. Xiaoxin is not. Tang Yu froze. What did Xiaoxin call him just now? He couldn't believe it, so he turned little Xinxin's little face and looked at her seriously. Little Xinxin was still crying, and she called out Papi again and again. Tang Yu hugged the chubby little person. His voice was so gentle that he almost didn't recognize it. His voice was slightly hoarse. Baby, what did you say? Papa. Little Xiaoxin proudly rested her little face on his shoulder, her little hands hugging his neck tightly. With great difficulty, Tang Yu suppressed the excitement in his heart and closed his eyes. How did Xiaoxin guess? Baby already knows. The chubby little guy's voice was soft and low. If he teased her again, she wouldn't say anything. Tang Yu's heart was extremely soft. He kissed her little heart and said, Then you must know that big sister is Mama, right? Xiaoxin did not make a sound and laid on his shoulder with tears in her eyes. She pursed her lips and looked very cute. What's wrong, baby? Do you know that Mama is unhappy? Tang Yu coaxed the little girl and looked at Pei Chi, who was standing at the bathroom door. He was obviously a little nervous. He gave her an expression that said to wait for a while, then pursed his lips and patted the little person in his arms. Little Xinxin raised her eyes and secretly glanced at Pei Chi. She buried her little round face again and said in a low voice, Baby, don't want it. Tang Yu was a little helpless, but he still coaxed her patiently. Why not? Little Xinxin pouted. Because baby is a hidden weapon, and it hurt big sister. Tang Yu couldn't help but laugh. This little girl. He looked at Pei Chi's slightly red face and said with a smile, The one who hurt big sister is daddy, not baby. Really? Little Xinxin came back to life, and there were little stars in her eyes. Chapter 1047. Little Xiaoxin peeked out from his embrace and stared at Pei Chi pitifully. Why isn't Mommy coming over to hug little Xiaoxin? The baby isn't happy anymore. Little Xiaoxin waited anxiously for a while, but to no avail. She burst into tears again. Pei Chi ran over and looked at Tang Yu. She had played with little Xiaoxin for a while, but to be honest, they were just playmates. She had yet to learn how to be a little mother. Little Xiaoxin started crying at this moment. She did not know if little Xiaoxin did not like her. So, she did not dare to come over to hug her. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi-Chi's silly look and could not help but think that his Chi-Chi was actually only 23 years old. She might not be able to accept such a big child. When she was pregnant, she was still a child. She wants you to hug her, Tang Yu said as he stuffed the plump little thing into Pei Chi-Chi's arms. Pei Chi-Chi's body was a little stiff. Although she had hugged her many times, this time was different. She almost stiffly hugged the little person. She did not know if the little person liked it or not. After a long time, little Xiaoxin complained softly, "Mommy, you're hugging me too tightly. The baby is hurting." Little Xiaoxin was a little fellow who loved herself very much. Pei Chi-Chi hurriedly softened her grip and turned the little fellow's little face to take a closer look. She clearly remembered it clearly, but she still wanted to take a closer look. Tang Yu smiled faintly at the side. Our little Xiaoxin is very smart. Unexpectedly, little Xiaoxin lay in Pei Chi-Chi's arms again and said very proudly, "Little Xiaoxin is not smart. Little Xiaoxin is very stupid." But her eyes were filled with incomparable intelligence and mischievousness. She was extremely adorable. Pei Chi-Chi hugged and kissed her again and again. The plump little fellow said very proudly, "Now I believe that you are little Xiaoxin's mommy." Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu looked at each other and smiled. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was a little bitter. It was hard to take care of children who were too smart. Although Xiaoxin had accepted her papa and mama, Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi both had to work, so Xiaoxin was still taken care of by Lin Yun from Monday to Friday, and Tang Yu would take care of her on weekends. Pei Chi-Chi said that she would go on strike every day and did not want to go to work anymore. Tang Yu just looked at her and coughed lightly. "Chi-Chi, you can't be distracted by playthings," little Xinshin said. "Daddy, little Xinshin is not a thing." After saying that, little Xinshin frowned and rolled away unhappily. Pei Chi-Chi leaned on Tang Yu's shoulder. "Look, how smart you are. You figured it out so quickly." Tang Yu looked at her and smiled. "Chi-Chi, you said this before, so her stupidity is inherited from you, and the smart part." Tang Yu stopped talking and then went to the study, leaving Pei Chi-Chi and little Xinshin crying out. He was too hateful. The days passed happily until the eve of their wedding. Little One held a bachelor party for Pei Chi-Chi. It was held in a small bar with a particularly good atmosphere. Pei Huan, who had just finished her confinement, was invited, as well as Pei Chi-Chi's colleagues from Jian Magazine, Amy, and the others. When Xiaowen suggested it, Pei Chi-Chi asked Tang Yu for his opinion. Mr. Tang sat on the sofa with a calm expression. "As long as you don't play with one eye, it's fine." Chapter 1048. Before she could finish her sentence, her waist was held by his large palm. Then, she was kissed. Their tongues intertwined, and he took possession of her completely, not letting go of a single inch. "Tang Yu." Pei Chi-Chi called his name helplessly. She tugged at his expensive shirt until it became a long crease. Tang Yu got up and carried her to the bedroom. She was thrown onto the soft bed. Her long black hair was scattered all over the pillow, and her pajamas were rolled up to her knees. It felt smooth. A small, tender leg challenged his determination. Tang Yu stood at the end of the bed, looking abstinent, but his slender fingers were unbuttoning his shirt. His thin lips gently spat out a sentence. "Very good, Pei Chi-Chi. I think I should squeeze you dry first?" When he said the last sentence, he had already leaned over and touched her red lips with his fingers. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't help laughing. "Tang Yu, this should be said by a woman, but the person who wants to have a bachelor party is not me." His fingers teased her little tongue shamelessly, and his eyes were filled with passion. which indirectly tempted her. She was originally laughing, but gradually, she couldn't laugh anymore. Her little face was flushed with passion, and she accepted his kiss. But he really kept kissing her and kissing her. After a long time, she kicked him willfully. Tang Yu, she rubbed her little feet against him, begging him silently. His thin lips covered her ears, and his voice was low and husky. Be good, beg me, she said obediently. But Tang Yu still had fire in his heart, and this was not enough. He tortured her even more. Say, brother. He said the last two words in a low voice. Pei Chi reached out and hit him after hearing it. Jerk. She bit her lips and glared at him. Tang Yu laughed hoarsely and coaxed her. No matter how much Pei Chi wanted it, she couldn't say it. Mr. Tang raised his eyebrows and gently stroked her little face with his fingers. Chi, are you really not going to say it? If you don't say it, I'm going to get serious. She didn't believe that he had any real skills. 10 minutes. Half an hour later, Pei Chi hummed softly, crawled into his arms like a kitten, and obediently said those two words. After that, she bit his shoulder. He is too wicked. After that, she didn't have the chance to think about anything else. She was tormented by him and didn't have the strength to think about anything else. He didn't let her go until 5 o'clock before dinner. Mr. Tang took a shower, changed his clothes, and stood at the head of the bed. Pei Chi was still asleep. His slender fingers gently touched her little face, smiling silently. Chi, get up. Oh, she turned over. So tired. Your bachelor party is at 7:30. You can prepare now. He kindly reminded her, feeling sour in his heart. Pei Chi turned over again. So noisy. I reminded you. Tang Yu said happily and happily went downstairs to have dinner with Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin looked at the young and handsome Papa and climbed into his arms. Papa, did you hit Mama with a hidden weapon again? She paused and carefully looked at Tang Yu, full of expectation. Is Xiaoxin going to have a sister soon? Tang Yu sweated. He had a vasectomy. Even if he ran out of bullets, it would be useless. Does Xiaoxin want another sister? He held Xiaoxin and asked seriously. Xiaoxin nodded hard and seriously. Chapter 1049. I gave birth to her myself. How can she be my younger sister? Papa lied. Tang Yu circled around the little girl. Look, aren't you also your mother's younger sister? Xiaoxin was confused. Thinking about it, it seemed to make sense. However, when Xiaoxin grew up and thought about this, she would feel that Papa was bad. Papa lied. It was obvious that Papa could not give birth to her. Tang Yu accompanied his daughter for dinner. When it was over, he looked at his watch. It was already 6 o'clock. He did not wake Pei Chi up without hesitation. Instead, he went to the study with Xiaoxin and stayed there until 8 o'clock. He only returned to the bedroom after Xiaoxin fell asleep. The little girl who should be having a bachelor party was lying unconscious on his big bed. Tang Yu smiled silently again. He sat at the head of the bed and scratched her little face. Chi, your bachelor party should start. At that moment, the phone on the bedside lit up and shook silently. Tang Yu had already adjusted it. He looked at it. It was from Little Wan and a few calls from Pei Huan. He walked to the balcony with the phone in hand and said in a good mood, I'm Tang Yu. Little Wan was high on the other side and wanted to call Pei Chi. However, when she heard Tang Yu's voice, she lost all her high spirits and called him Mr. Tang. Then, she asked carefully, Where's Boss Pei? Boss Pei? Tang Yu smiled silently again and looked at the little girl on the big bed. She was sleeping soundly. Then, he said lightly, Boss Pei is a little tired and fell asleep. Fell asleep? Tired? Little One wailed in her heart. What time was it? How could he be so tired that he fell asleep? However, she was also an experienced person. Her mind was blank for a few seconds before she came back to her senses. Wait a minute. Tired and fell asleep? Oh my God. Oh my God. Did he mean what she thought? Mr. Tang did not want Boss Pei to attend the bachelor party. So, he deliberately left Boss Pei on the bed? How many times did he have to do this? Little One was shocked. Little One was stunned. Little One's worldview had been refreshed. She held the phone in a daze. Tang Yu's voice came through the phone with a faint smile. Have fun. Xiaowen was still in a daze. Then, she smiled bitterly. Even the main character didn't come. Who would they play with when they made a show? How could he be happy? At this moment, Amy came over with her arm around Pei Huan's neck. The two of them were birds of a feather, regretting not meeting each other earlier. Pei Huan held the wine glass in her hand and looked drunk. How is it? Are you still not going to come? Little Wen's face fell. Boss Pei, ********, is dead. Tonight, Wuji was the one who spoke, and Little One was especially rude. Pei Huan and Amy were stunned for a moment before they understood what Little One meant. They said in unison, No way? Is Tang Yu that petty? When it came to this, Pei Huan had the right to speak. He snorted. You guys don't know how dark Tang Yu's heart is. Sometimes, during banquets, he would leave hickeys on Chi-Chi's body because he didn't want her to wear low-cut clothes or clothes that exposed her back. Amy's Little One screamed. Also, if she looks at other men more and says that other men are good-looking, she won't be able to sleep at night. She won't dare to look at them again. Pei Huan's face was full of disdain. Such a man looks noble, but he's actually very coquettish. He won't say anything and won't show it. He's just... Chapter 1050. Amy held her face in her hands, her cheeks blushing. Wow, so charming and rich. Please give me a dozen of such men. Pei Huan couldn't stand her and snorted. Let's see if you have the physical strength to play with a domineering CEO in bed first. Amy didn't agree with that. Pei Chi-Chi's body isn't as sturdy as mine. She was too embarrassed to say that she was a girl. Pei Huan sneered at Amy's naivety. You know, Pei Chi-Chi and I grew up together. Let me give you an example. Even if there were two of me, I wouldn't be able to defeat her. Pei Chi-Chi had never learned martial arts, but she was very strong. In fact, Pei Huan really wanted to wipe her tears. The beast in her house was so strong that she needed to take good care of it. It had only been 42 days, and that beast, Qin Mingzhu, had been pressing her down and doing it day and night. Her waist was about to break, and she hadn't rested a day for a week. She wanted to relax today, but Pei Chi-Chi hadn't come yet. What a disappointment. They had prepared a fierce man for Pei Chi-Chi, the kind with Xiong's fur. Pei Chi-Chi had always been envious that she could pluck Lao Can's fur, so they found one for her. But the main character didn't come. Xiaowen asked worriedly, What about the man? He was only willing to pluck it after paying 50,000 yuan. Pei Huan looked at Amy. Oh, let her have it easy. She's the only one without a man here. Amy snorted. Pei Huan, you really know how to poke at people's hearts. Pei Huan hooked her arm and looked at her seductively. Then, Amy, if you don't want it, give it to me. Amy thought about it and snorted. Change to a set. I don't want to pluck Xiong's fur. I want real bullets. Xiaowen was stunned by Amy's bold and unrestrained attitude and swallowed her saliva. Pei Huan was also a little drunk. She patted Amy. Good. It's my treat. Add 100,000 yuan. You can play however you want. So, it was a wise move for Tang Yu not to let Pei Chi-Chi come. In the wee hours of the morning, Pei Chi-Chi suddenly woke up. He opened his eyes and grabbed his phone to look at the time. Then, he covered his eyes and howled. She climbed onto Tang Yu's body and bit his neck. Tang Yu, why didn't you wake me up? She bit his neck angrily, wishing she could eat his flesh. Pei Chi-Chi, I called you a few times, but you were the one who said you were sleepy. He patted her, indicating for her to come down. But Pei Chi-Chi refused to come down and continued to stay in his arms. You did it on purpose. She bit her lip and looked at him accusingly. How did he seduce her at that time, torturing her to the point where she wished she was dead, whetting her appetite, coaxing her to come in, brother? She had already said such shameful words, yet he still schemed against her. Pei Chi-Chi bit his neck angrily again. Tang Yu let her do as she pleased, only reminding her, Mrs. Tang, our wedding is in 10 hours. Are you sure you want me to bring a neck full of hickeys to the wedding? She hung on him like a little monkey, her slender limbs clinging onto him. She hummed softly. I don't care. She was like that, biting disobediently, like a little kitten. Tang Yu lowered his head. Suddenly, he asked in a very soft voice, Pei Chi-Chi, do you want to enjoy the man that Shaowen prepared for you? The little kitten on his body stopped biting. It raised its eyes and looked at him, its gaze a little dazed. How did Tang Yu know? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.